and this was a huge puzzle to them when they found this out. So there was an article I read on it that said, well, there must have been some disease that wiped out all, because the other thing they discovered at that time was that this was a very recent event in history, less than 20,000 years ago. And so they postulated a theory that some disease came through and wiped out all of mankind, except for primordial Adam and primordial Eve.
20,000 years ago?
Less than 20,000 years ago. This is a bottleneck genetically, and some put it like at less than 10, but the best they can stretch it out, they can stretch it to about 20,000 years. We all come from one common female and one male gene, so we know that there aren't any races, that we are all descended from a primordial Eve. And their explanation is that all the other evolved species, a disease came through, wiped everybody out, and left one couple who found each other.
You kind of really got to twist yourself into pretzel shape to sustain the evolutionary theory. This book gets into the fact that the radiometric dating is all messed up, and that doesn't prove anything. There's all sorts of assumptions in radiometric dating, and they can only date the rocks for these millions of years kinds of things. And we've talked about that many times. We'll show more in the future, I'm sure, on how the levels were created in the strata. They're not created over time with an inch building up over 1 million years, so that this huge dinosaur, an inch at a time, it gets buried over 1 million years. And of course it doesn't totally deteriorate over the tens of millions of years. The body just keeps getting slowly covered and is preserved by dust.
That's because the dinosaur stepped into a time machine and time stood still, and then it was accelerated by the rest of them. Then they used a special, like the magic primordial soup, they had this magic primordial mud, you see, that kind of covered the whole thing. And then if you have enough faith, you can believe that it didn't rot. And
well, they're starting to admit that most of these animals had to have been covered by a lot of water rapidly, which leads to the great flood that is spoken about in the Bible and spoken about in over 200 cultures around the world, that there was this great flood. And so all of this information, everything, the heavy evidence points to what the Bible states as being true. Here's the Bible. As opposed to what evolutionists state. But you've got to have an alternative theory if you don't want to believe in God. And you really have got to get rid of Genesis and the creation account of all creatures and man as well, in order to get rid of the Bible.
And I always wondered, and I think it was Kent Hovind that said it, and it hit me like a brick, was why did God use a flood to wipe out all of mankind? Why didn't he just say, everybody die or send a disease? Why a flood? And a flood leaves a record. If you had a worldwide flood, you would have sedimentary layers all over the world, on top of mountains, on top of Everest you have fossils. There is no place where you don't have sedimentary layers. So this argument you hear from some people, well, it was a local flood. Well, how do you build up enough water to cover all the mountains in that area and contain that so it didn't spill out? Well, probably like God parted the Red Sea, he made this big cylinder of water just flood this one area, and it just kind of filled up. But the Bible says the whole world was flooded. And when you look around, if you had a whole world flooded and all animals were wiped out, and massive amount of mud, you'd have all these layers, and you'd have animals buried in the mud. And that's what it takes. It takes an enormous catastrophic event to bury something as large as a dinosaur, and with enough mud on top of them so no microbial activity can decay that. And it's so basic and obvious. That's why they have to educate children go back to kindergarten, start off millions and millions of years, because it is so obvious when you look at it that you have to be brainwashed, and you got to start off at 2 or 3 years old, or the average person would just figure out.
And boy, was I brainwashed.
Yeah. Me too.
It's interesting you mentioned the evidence left by the flood, but I think of the oil deposits around the world that were left because of the flood, and the heat and fuel and everything else that we have today that goes along with the benefits of that flood.
Yeah.
I mean, not only the evidential benefits,
Just like,
you know, we have fossils of a live fish eating another fish. You know, that had to have happened through something catastrophic.
yeah.
But yet we have, even better than that, is those oil deposits that allow us to be technologically advanced.
By the way, those oil deposits, if you recall, they lead to a very young age of the Earth, around 20,000 years at most for the whole Earth, because the pressure of that oil will break through rocks. The pressure coming up from the oil is greater than the strength of the rocks and the gravity holding it all together. And scientists estimate that within 25,000 years, for sure, it would break through. So that oil's only been there. It's less than 25,000 years. And so that also goes and mitigates against an ancient age for the Earth and for all these dinosaurs and, and everything
that
like
hasn't been explained. In fact, some of them say that it shouldn't, that natural gas should have escaped and got out in 10,000 years. You know, but it's because the movement, the subduction zones, and the very movement, if you accept the movement of the crust, as that stuff bends, the rock cracks and gas would escape out. So they're saying that how it could be there this long is a puzzle, because they figured that at 10,000 years it would start leaking out just from the subduction zones and the Earth's crust moving around. So
that's an incredible God that we have to not only cleanse the earth and form the earth, but to provide all the minerals to sustain life for a certain period of time anyway. And as we can see, the more we're using up those things he left for us to survive, the shorter time's really getting as the population continues to explode and expand and use up all those resources that God has created. And again, backing up the prophecy of the Bible and the length really of time of life here on earth, and it's just incredible. I sit in awe of God to be able to do that all just like that.
And I think the other part is, you know, the earth was judged once by water, and again, you can look around and see fossils everywhere, so you know it was. So anyone that says, oh well, God wouldn't, there is no hell, God wouldn't send people to hell, there will be no judgment by fire, this is all mythology, and you look at these rock layers and all these dead things buried in the rock layers, I think it's another evidence that
that he's just.
That he's just, you know. And if people ignored him back then and went and did what they felt like doing, and this is proof that that event happened, and it gives you reason to believe that this next event that is predicted and prophesied will happen.
You know, that's definitely something to meditate on. Here we have evidence of a just God judging, just as he said he would.
And that's probably another reason why Satan wants to pretend there was no world flood, why the huge drive by the anti-Christian movement is people that say that aren't Christians are tools of Satan, whether or not they know it. And so they're looking for ways to not have to face God, not a judgment, and not face judgment, but they're pawns in Satan's realm, if you will. And if they can keep this whole thinking about a flood causing all the fossils, they can say, well, Noah's flood wasn't a big deal, the Bible is wrong about that, it wasn't a world flood, and they can diminish what God says will happen. And it's when you go around and say, you know, how do you get clamshells on top, fossilized clamshells on top of Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the world, and up there are fossils on top of that? Worldwide flood.
Explain that to me.
Right.
And fish strata, you know, fossilized up there on mountains, and
you can find them right here in Oregon.
Tropical plants, leaves and stuff like that.
And coral on top of the Rockies. Where did that come from?
Right.
It just evidentially, how can you not want to at least investigate it?
You know, and the idea of God being just, you know, comes from sin, that old out of date, politically incorrect word sin, but the Bible is real clear that that's the problem of mankind, is that we're warped, we're bent out of shape. The 10 Commandments that were given by God show it. We all covet, we all have stolen, we've all lied. So we're all convicted. If you're convicted of murder, you're known as a murderer, you know, unfortunately, and you have to pay what is due to society.